An elderly knight wanders his vast halls in his castle in France. He looks at his treasures and reflects on his adventures in the Holy Land. As he walks around, his back aches, his knees strain after being on horseback for so many miles throughout so many years. But his thoughts are one of shame and failure. He has survived both the Second and the Third Crusade, but he never managed to retake the Holy Land in its entirety. Jerusalem is still held by Muslims. In the distance, he can see two riders approaching his castle. He notices that they are flying the papal flag. As these two messengers run up his vast staircase, the knight wonders what they carry. When they arrive to him, he is informed that the Pope has called for a fourth crusade. The old knight feels a sense of pride overtake him and a smile glints across his face. He has that rare opportunity of a third try, a third chance to finally reach his life goal of taking the holy city of Jerusalem. Hello and welcome to the channel. I am the Knight of History and this is part number 5 of the Crusades. Today we are going to end the Crusader series and see what impact the Crusades have today. So if you haven't watched part number 1 to part number 4 yet, I highly recommend that you go watch those first. Additionally, I want to talk to you about something else. I'm thinking of starting a donors wall of fame, which will probably be done through a cash app or something like that. However, the benefits from these donations will be used for charitable purposes. I am involved in a number of charities all around the world, in fact. So I have the capability to potentially do good with this money. But let me know if you would be interested in doing this, in actually donating to a charity through me, myself, and I. And let me know if you think it's a good idea. Comment down below, let me know. As always, please consider liking and subscribing, because you're going to comment anyway. Now let's get into this. Fewer than 10 years had passed since Richard the Lionheart's retreat from Jerusalem before Pope Innocent III was calling for yet another crusade. But it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't like the other crusades in the past. In 1201, this massive maritime republic of Venice was asked to construct an enormous fleet of 200 ships for the Fourth Crusade. The Venetians were led by their doge, like a duke, a king pretty much, of a republic, who was an old blind man called Risorgimento, and he came up with a solution to this problem. But would it work? To answer that question, we actually need to start with a Byzantine prince named Alexis Anleos, who was living in exile in Europe at the time, and together with the doge, the blind doge in Risorgimento of Venice, they both sailed over to Constantinople with an enormous force. Alexis asked the Crusades that were with them to help take back his father's throne as Byzantine emperor. In return, Alexis promised the Crusaders that he would give them money, let them go on to complete their journey in the Holy Land and finance their mission. In April 1203, the Crusaders set sail from Europe to Constantinople. They mounted the supposedly impregnable sea walls of Constantinople using special ships that were fitted with these designed siege towers on the actual ship. And then they overthrew the leaders of the city, placing Alexis, this prince, on the throne of the Byzantine emperor. Once he was made emperor, though, this Alexis was unable to raise any of the money that he had promised to the Crusades, and things began to sour. In early 1204, Alexis himself was overthrown by his own people, who strangled him to death. With the emperor dead and these 20,000 Crusader knights and warriors and soldiers outside the city wall, they knew they had no chance of getting the money now with the emperor dead. So they marched into the city and took it with force. By April 1204, the Crusader force had occupied the entire city and subjugated its population to 3 days of violence and plunder. The greatest Christian city in all of Christendom and all of Europe was destroyed, stripped of its treasures, relics, including a relic that was believed to be part of Jesus' crown of thorns and the head of John the Baptist. Content with their plunder, the Crusaders decided not to even bother on to go to the Holy Land to take back Jerusalem, but rather take their treasures back to Europe with them. Many of these treasures went to the savvy Republic of Venice, who adorned their city with these amazing statues and treasures. This Fourth Crusade was a hopeless excuse of a crusade, and it was a farce. It was really the end of the real Crusades, to be honest. There were, of course, a number of Crusades that were going to happen throughout the 13th century. Often they would focus on Muslim power in Egypt before progressing to Jerusalem, such as that of the Crusade of 1212, which is known as the Children's Crusade, where thousands of children left their homes and families in France and Germany and attempted to sail across to the Holy Land before they were captured and sold into slavery in North Africa. The Crusades were done. However, this concept of crusading had changed. It had increasingly been used as a justification of wars against non-Christians, not just in the Holy Land, but all across Europe and Northern Africa as well. The Christian possessions within the Holy Land began to slowly shrink until there was just the tiny port of Acre. By the 18th of March 1291, Acre fell as well to an enormous, thundering attack from a new breed of Muslim warrior known as the Mamluk. The Mamluks had originated from Central Asia and had already taken control of Egypt, and they wouldn't stop there. They would go on to create their own empire. Anyway, some of the Christian population that were still in Acre managed to escape through sea, but those who were still there were captured and sold into slavery. If you were a Christian knight, though, in a crusade, and you were caught by these Mamluks, you were dragged out of the city walls of Acre to be executed. This was really the last dance for the Crusaders. The impact and influence over the Holy Land was gone. Although, was it the last impact that the Crusaders had had? Because they had transformed life in Europe. Pilgrims from Europe had arrived in the Holy Land by boat to see the biblical historical sites with their own eyes: Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Nazareth, Galilee, the River of Jordan, etc. The people on pilgrims, these visiting Europeans, learned from the cultures and the intellectual wealth of the Islamic world. Soap, mirrors, magnifying glasses all came to Europe via the Islamic world, as did our modern numbers, and of course algebra as well. There was even the stringed instrument called a lute, chess, dominoes. All of these games and all these musical instruments and all of these useful things came from the Middle East. There was even the ancient Roman and ancient Greek texts that had been translated by Islams and then lost by their original owners, which were now found in the Islamic world, opening up new knowledge for the Europeans from the classics. Despite the harsh and violent fighting between Christians and Muslim armies, trade between the two parts of the world was really thriving in the Crusades. Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa really grew extraordinarily wealthy and established their own quarters on the ports of Tripoli and Acre. Through these ports, goods and trades went as far afield as India and China. Sugar canes, olive oil, lemons, apricots and dates became popular in Europe because of the Crusades. Even Saladin forged close trading links with the Italians from Pisa, who sold him the European timber to build his ships. Although there was, of course, all this good, there was a lot of bad that went along with the Crusades, such as the Jews who were living amongst the Christians in Europe for centuries. and they became increasingly attacked just for being Jews, which were supposedly the enemies of Christ, because of course Jesus Christ was killed by Jews under Pontius Pilate. These Jewish people were hated. As the knights marched through France and Germany in the First Crusade, they massacred thousands of Jewish populations throughout the Rhineland, because raising levels of anti-Semitism really started to spread throughout Europe. Jewish people were expelled from Germany in 1100s, and then from England in 1290, and from France in 1306. The Crusades had given birth to a harder and more intolerant Christian Europe. This, of course, really led to the horrific atrocities of World War II, the Holocaust, which led to the formation of Israel, a modern state who currently rule over the Holy Land with rather impactful might, which is now impacting on the Arabs that once occupied that area outright. I'm talking, of course, about Palestine. The Holy Land is meant to be a place of goodness and godliness and acceptance, but it has such extensive reverberations around the world. It had thousands of years of history where different religions and different people have fought over it. The fight for the Holy Land is perhaps in a dormant stage, but potentially not yet complete. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you did enjoy that. Like, comment, and subscribe. The more you know.